December 16, 1944, at 630 hours, Monschau, Germany. The morning was cold and frosty as Hauptmann Klaus Richter of the 12th SS Panzer Division hurriedly scribbled notes that would later become a chilling entry in Wehrmacht combat logs. American forces had deployed a new weapon that challenged all existing tactical principles. His men were being decimated in their foxholes by artillery fire exploding midair above them, leaving no means of defense or cover. The threat was coming from the sky itself. Through the morning fog, Richter witnessed an entire battalion wiped out as they tried to cross open terrain near Herfen. They weren't hit directly. Such precise hits were uncommon in artillery warfare. Instead, it was a terrifying phenomenon. Shells detonating at a height of 30 feet above his troops, scattering lethal shrapnel downwards, rendering any cover useless. In just 3 minutes, 702 German soldiers perished. The handful who managed to return were traumatized and could only mutter the phrase "Die Luft total," meaning the air kills. What Richter did not know was that he had witnessed the first combat use of America's most closely guarded secret weapon in ground warfare. A device so groundbreaking it would enhance artillery effectiveness by 1,000%, save countless Allied lives, and fundamentally change the nature of war. The proximity fuse, a miniaturized radar system embedded within an artillery shell, was the world's first smart munition. It proved more decisive than any other secret technology except perhaps the atomic bomb. The statistics would soon reveal its transformative impact. Conventional shells required 500 rounds to destroy one enemy aircraft, whereas proximity-fused shells needed only 155. In trench warfare, traditional artillery killed soldiers hiding in trenches just 5% of the time. With proximity fuses, this rose to 70%. London's survival against Von flying bombs became possible largely due to these new shells. Within 4 weeks, proximity fuses destroyed 79% of incoming missiles. Yet, the story of this revolutionary weapon originated not in American laboratories, but during Britain's darkest hours when survival itself seemed improbable. On October 30, 1939, in Exeter, England, as Britain faced its first winter of war, W.A.S. Butement, a young scientist, submitted a groundbreaking proposal that would revolutionize warfare. Working alongside Edward Scheer and Amherst Thompson at the Air Defense Establishment, Butement had conceived an innovative concept: a smart artillery shell capable of detecting and engaging enemy aircraft autonomously. This idea stemmed from harsh mathematical realities. During World War I, anti-aircraft gunners typically fired 85 Zero shells to destroy one enemy plane. By 1939, with faster and higher-flying planes, the situation had deteriorated further. Britain's survival in the impending aerial conflict hinged on drastically improving these odds. Butement's solution involved using radio waves to detect approaching aircraft and detonate shells at optimal range automatically. However, he encountered a formidable obstacle. His radio fuse needed to withstand extreme conditions, such as forces exceeding 20,000 times normal gravity, spinning at up to 30,000 revolutions per minute, operating across temperature ranges from -50 to +100 degrees Fahrenheit, and maintaining the ability to detect aircraft from a distance of 70 feet. By June 1940, British scientists had constructed prototypes for testing in unrotated projectiles, essentially rockets against balloon targets. These tests confirmed the concept's viability, but also highlighted the immense technological hurdles. The breakthrough came unexpectedly from across the Atlantic. On September 6, 1940, the Canadian Pacific liner Duchess of Richmond docked in Halifax, Nova Scotia, carrying a cargo more precious than gold: Sir Henry Tizard, and a black metal box containing every major British military secret. This historic mission, later known as the Tizard Mission, was an unprecedented gamble for Britain, a nation fighting for survival, sharing its most closely guarded military technologies with another country not yet at war. The delegation assembled in Washington on September 12th, settling into residence at the Wardman Park Hotel. For 7 days, Britain unveiled its technological marvels, showcasing radar systems, jet engine blueprints, explosive innovations, and chemical weapon research. However, on September 19, in a conference room overlooking Connecticut Avenue, British physicist Dr. John Cockcroft met with a specially invited American scientist, Dr. Merle A. Tuve, then 39 years old. As the meeting unfolded, Cockcroft disclosed details about Britain's proximity fuse research, capturing Tuve's undivided attention. Born and raised in rural South Dakota, Tuve had spent his youth experimenting with radio sets alongside Ernest Lawrence, who would later receive a Nobel Prize. Just 1 month prior, in August 1940, Vannevar Bush appointed Tuve as the head of a new secret division within the National Defense Research Committee, Section T. This section was established specifically to develop proximity fuses. Tuve's selection for this critical role wasn't arbitrary. Earlier that summer, while listening to radio reports about the London Blitz with his wife Winnie, he had been moved to tears by descriptions of children being rescued from destroyed neighborhoods in minutes. He felt compelled to act, believing that technology held the key to stopping the bombers. Now, as Cockcroft outlined the British research during their Washington meeting, he was offering Tuve a pivotal opportunity. Despite the brilliance of the concept, significant challenges remained unresolved. The primary issue was developing vacuum tubes and electronic circuits robust enough to withstand the force of being fired from a gun. Cockcroft candidly admitted that Britain's industrial constraints made large-scale development impractical. Given America's substantial industrial capabilities and secure geographical position, it became clear that only the United States could take on this ambitious project. Tuve departed the meeting armed with a task that would dominate the next 5 years of his life and galvanize the entire American electronics sector. The challenge appeared insurmountable, demanding innovations yet to be conceived, manufacturing processes never before attempted, and production levels beyond imagination. In December 1940, at the Department of Terrestrial Magnetism within the Carnegie Institution in Washington, D.C., the mansion located at 5241 Broad Branch Road had become the nerve center for America's most covert weapons program. Tuve had assembled a team that would revolutionize warfare. This group included nuclear physicist Richard B. Roberts, who had worked with Niels Bohr, Henry H. Porter, an acoustics expert, Robert B. Broad, who specialized in cosmic rays, Lawrence Hufstad, a nuclear physics specialist, Lloyd Berkner, a pioneer in ionospheric research, and James Van Allen, a 26-year-old physicist whose discovery of Earth's radiation belts would later make him famous, though his wartime contributions remained classified for many years. The challenge they faced defied every preconceived notion about electronics. Proximity fuses needed to be fully functional radar systems, comprising transmitters, receivers, amplifiers, and detonators, all compressed into a space smaller than a coffee can. They had to generate radio waves, detect reflections from targets, process signals, and trigger explosions while enduring forces capable of destroying any conventional electronic device. Van Allen tackled the most fundamental challenge, creating vacuum tubes that could withstand being fired from a gun. Traditional vacuum tubes, with their fragile glass envelopes and delicate filaments, shattered under forces as low as 100 times gravity. The proximity fuses required survival at an acceleration rate 200 times greater than this limit. For 6 months, Van Allen collaborated with Raytheon, a hearing aid manufacturer based in Massachusetts, to develop compact tubes with innovative design. Instead of suspending filaments from fragile wires, they devised sturdy structures using methods adapted from hearing aid production. The pivotal moment arrived in January 1942 when Van Allen introduced his mouse-trap spring mechanism, which safeguarded tube filaments during the intense acceleration phase and released them for normal functioning once the projectile was airborne. This invention remained classified until 1947, but was recognized as one of the war's most significant electronic advancements. In December 1940, Lloyd Berkner made another critical breakthrough by creating a circuit design that separated transmitter and receiver functions, surpassing the British Autodyne system. His innovation enabled the fuse to detect targets at greater distances with enhanced reliability, crucial for combat effectiveness. By March 1942, the project had outgrown Carnegie's facilities. Consequently, Johns Hopkins University established the Applied Physics Laboratory in an abandoned Chevrolet dealership located at 862 Georgia Avenue in Silver Spring, Maryland. The building still carried the scent of motor oil and rubber when the initial scientists arrived, but within weeks, it transformed into one of the world's most cutting-edge electronics laboratories. Merle Tuvey was appointed as APL's first director, setting a laboratory culture that would shape American weapons development for decades to come. Signs adorned every wall, including one stating, "I don't want any damn fool in this laboratory to save money. I only want him to save time." Another sign read, "Our moral responsibility extends all the way to the final battle use of this unit. Its failure there is our failure." The technical achievements they accomplished still appear impossible even by today's standards. The proximity fuses operated as continuous wave radar systems transmitting at frequencies between 180 and 220 megahertz, which were considered state-of-the-art in radio technology in 1940. The projectile's metal shell served as the transmitting antenna, with a small conical antenna positioned at the nose to excite it. The system utilized an Autodyne setup where a single oscillator tube served dual purposes as both transmitter and receiver. This ingenious design was a direct result of stringent space limitations. Within an enclosure measuring only 5 inches in length and 2 inches in diameter, engineers managed to integrate 4 compact vacuum tubes, 130 electronic parts, a wet cell battery, safety features, and the detonation mechanism. The oscillator tube emitted a signal at 70 megahertz, with harmonics ranging between 180 and 220 megahertz. When these radio waves encountered incoming targets, they produced interference patterns that altered the loading of the oscillator, resulting in beat frequencies within the 200 to 800 hertz spectrum. These signals were then amplified through a 2-stage process, filtered to isolate specific frequencies indicative of approaching objects, and ultimately triggered a thyratron gas-filled tube to initiate detonation. The power supply also presented significant challenges due to the extreme G-forces and limited space available for traditional batteries. The National Carbon Company responded with an innovative reserve battery that used liquid electrolyte contained in a glass ampule. Upon firing, the shock would break the ampule, and centrifugal force from the shell's rotation would mix the electrolyte with carbon and zinc plates, activating the battery mid-flight. This ensured indefinite shelf life until deployment while guaranteeing full power availability when needed. Multiple safety measures were implemented to prevent accidental detonation before impact. Centrifugal switches remained disconnected until the projectile achieved a sufficient spin rate, ensuring that they would only close upon reaching an optimal speed. A delay of 0.5 to 0.7 seconds after firing was programmed to avoid premature detonation near friendly forces. The sensitivity level gradually increased throughout flight and reached maximum efficiency at typical engagement distances. On January 5, 1943, at 800 hours, the radar on USS Helena detected incoming aircraft in the southwest Pacific area near Guadalcanal, specifically four IGD-3A Val dive bombers approaching from a height of 12,000 feet. Lieutenant Russell Red Cochran, who commanded the aft 5-inch battery, had been informed about the new ammunition only days earlier. In the magazine below deck, gunners were loading shells marked with distinctive green bands, indicative of proximity-fused rounds. At a range of 8,000 yards and closing, Cochran observed the incoming planes through his binoculars. In traditional warfare, his weapons required direct hits on targets, which was nearly impossible to achieve against agile aircraft in motion. However, these particular shells were an exception. All they needed was to come within 70 feet of their objective. The order was given, commence firing. Helena's cannons unleashed the first barrage into the air. Red arcs formed as the shells streaked across the morning sky, narrowly missing the leading bomber without making contact. No immediate effect was observed. The distance between them and the target remained too great. A second volley followed 15 seconds later. At a range of 5,000 yards from Helena and an altitude of 11,000 feet, one shell passed approximately 60 feet away from the lead aircraft. The resulting explosion was unlike anything Cochran had witnessed before. Instead of continuing past or detonating upon impact with the plane, it exploded midair, dispersing a perfectly spherical cloud of fragments outward. The bomber's wing was instantly severed, and hundreds of steel shards struck its engine, causing it to erupt into flames. Unlike other dramatic breakups, this aircraft did not disintegrate spectacularly. It simply lost control and transformed from a functional dive bomber into an uncontrollable ball of fire. "Splash one," the spotter reported. The remaining bombers broke off their attack, but Helena's guns continued to track them. 3 additional salvos were launched, comprising 12 more proximity-fused shells. Another plane met its fate when a shell detonated 40 feet beneath it, sending upward-directed fragments into the fuel tanks and killing the pilot instantly. In the radio room, the combat report was being prepared for transmission. Enemy aircraft had been engaged using a new type of ammunition that exceeded all expectations in terms of effectiveness. 2 enemy planes were confirmed destroyed. However, the report failed to capture the profound psychological impact it had on Helena's crew. Gunner's mate First Class Anthony Pucci later recalled that everyone was amazed by what they witnessed. For months, they fired thousands of rounds at Japanese aircraft and rarely managed to hit one, but now they were bringing them down with just a few shots. It felt as if divine intervention was guiding their shells. Samuel Eliot Morrison, the official naval historian present in the Pacific Theater, noted that the evidence of the accuracy of the anti-aircraft batteries and the effectiveness of the super-secret Mark 32 fuse was clear from the smoking fuselages and burning debris on the surface. The impact of this new technology spread rapidly throughout the fleet. On August 12, 1942, even before Helena's combat debut, USS Cleveland conducted a test that would convince the Navy to invest heavily in this revolutionary innovation. In Chesapeake Bay, the cruiser faced off against 3 radio-controlled drone aircraft capable of evasive maneuvers. The planned 2-day test was completed within just over an hour. The first drone was destroyed by the second burst of proximity-fused shells. The second drone fell after 4 bursts, and the third drone was obliterated with only 1 burst. The observers were so impressed that they canceled the remaining tests and immediately ordered mass production. Admiral William S. Blandy, watching from Cleveland's bridge, turned to his aide in amazement. This development alters everything. Every vessel in the Pacific must be equipped with these rounds without delay. By spring 1943, proximity fuses were being distributed to the region in unprecedented numbers. The initial shipment of 5,000 rounds was delivered to USS Enterprise, USS Saratoga, and USS Helena under the direct oversight of Commander W.S. Parsons, who would later play a crucial role in arming the atomic bomb on board Enola Gay. Security protocols were stringent. The shells were kept in specially designated magazines with armed guards posted at all times. Only gunnery officers received detailed briefings about their capabilities, while crew members were informed that they were dealing with special incendiary rounds to account for their distinctive appearance. The data from 1943 demonstrated a remarkable transformation. Despite comprising just 25% of anti-aircraft ammunition fired, proximity fuses accounted for an astounding 51% of all Japanese aircraft destroyed by naval gunfire. The rate of shells required per kill dropped dramatically, from 508 for conventional time-fused rounds to merely 155 for the new proximity-fused ammunition, a threefold improvement that would continue to grow as gunners gained experience. Gunner Robert Chen, who served on USS Essex and was promoted to second class in March 1943, recorded these changes in his diary. On one occasion, he fired 300 rounds at attacking Betis, but registered no hits. In September 1943, the arrival of the new ammunition with green bands marked a turning point. He used only 80 rounds to destroy 3 enemy planes. Crew members speculated that their aim had improved, unaware that it was actually the enhanced shells doing most of the work. On June 19, 1944, at 1,000 hours, the Philippine Sea, approximately 200 miles west of Guam, another significant event was unfolding. Lieutenant James Van Allen stood on the flag bridge of USS Washington, observing the radar screens that showed incoming enemy contacts closing in. This was the same James Van Allen who had developed shockproof vacuum tubes, now witnessing his invention's ultimate real-world application. The Japanese had committed their entire carrier aviation force, a staggering 423 aircraft, to a last-ditch effort aimed at crippling the American fleet supporting the invasion of the Marianas Islands. Van Allen had joined the Navy in November 1942 and spent 16 months training gunnery officers across various ships within the Pacific Fleet. He was aware that every vessel was stocked with proximity-fused ammunition, but he knew well that there is a significant difference between theoretical knowledge and practical combat experience. Raid 1, announced the Combat Information Center, bearing 265 Angels 2069. Admiral Mark Mitchell issued orders. Launch all fighters, gun crews to battle stations. As Hellcat fighters engaged Japanese formations, those that managed to break through encountered a relentless barrage of proximity-fused anti-aircraft fire, a defensive strategy unprecedented in naval warfare. From the bridge of USS Washington, Van Allen watched as the sky filled with black smoke trails, each marking a detonation from proximity fuses. Japanese aircraft began falling out of the sky like raindrops. A Zero fighter swooped down on USS South Dakota, which was positioned just 1,000 yards away from USS Washington. Van Allen observed as the South Dakota's 5-inch guns smoothly tracked and engaged the enemy plane with precise bursts. On the third round, a shell exploded within 50 feet of the Zero. The aircraft did not burst into flames. Instead, it disintegrated in midair, its wings separating from the fuselage, engine falling away, and pilot's body tumbling through space. Van Allen later described it to his wife as systematic slaughter. "The proximity fuses turned our ships into fortresses," he wrote. The Japanese pilots were undeniably brave, continuing their assault despite witnessing the annihilation of their squadrons. But courage alone could not overcome superior technology. By the end of the day, Japan had lost 315 aircraft from carriers and an additional 50 planes based on land. In contrast, American losses amounted to only 29 aircraft, primarily due to operational mishaps. This lopsided battle marked the effective demise of Japanese carrier aviation. They would never again conduct a standard carrier strike operation. Desperation led them to adopt kamikaze tactics as their next major strategy. Aviation radio operator Charles Calhoun on USS Bunker Hill noted that he could see planes falling everywhere, aflame in pieces, or intact but empty. The gunners were alternating between laughter and tears, overjoyed at finally being able to retaliate after 2 years of enduring Japanese air attacks. Proximity fuses made their guns incredibly effective. On October 25, 1944, at 740 hours off the coast of the Philippines, Lieutenant Commander Robert Roberts witnessed in horror from USS White Plains a burning Zero fighter deliberately crashing into the flight deck of USS St. Louis. The resulting explosion set off torpedo warheads in the hangar deck, and within minutes, St. Louis capsized and sank, the first major warship lost to a kamikaze attack. The Japanese had found that the only way to overcome proximity fuses was to ensure their planes reached the target regardless of damage, exploiting momentum to crash into the ships. Thus, the divine wind had begun. Statistical data uncovered a strategic transformation in naval warfare. Traditional Japanese assault tactics yielded merely a 2% success rate, with only 23 hits out of 1,092 attempts from October 1944 to January 1945. In contrast, kamikaze missions attained a significantly higher 34% success rate, resulting in 121 successful strikes from 352 efforts. The introduction of proximity fuses rendered standard attacks perilous for Japanese forces, prompting them to adopt suicidal tactics instead. Nevertheless, these new weapons also posed formidable challenges against kamikaze operations, with anti-aircraft artillery claiming 231 kills or deflections out of 364 kamikaze attacks during the Philippines campaign, a 64% success rate. Proximity fuses were responsible for approximately 44% of all 5-inch gun hits. Without them, American casualties would likely have escalated by 2 to 3 times. Gunner's mate William Fomby, aboard USS Nashville, encapsulated this new reality. The Japanese came at us like they didn't care about living because they truly did not. Our proximity fuses turned entire planes into confetti, but even that debris posed a severe threat when traveling at 300 miles per hour. The fuses protected us from most kamikaze strikes, yet those that managed to penetrate through proved catastrophic. On May 11, 1945, at 1,500 hours, radar operator Commander Baron J. Maloney on board USS Hadley was monitoring his screen with mounting apprehension as Kiku Sway No. 6 approached. Over 150 Japanese aircraft were participating in a coordinated kamikaze assault. The picket station was manned solely by USS Hadley and USS Evans, functioning as the fleet's initial line of defense and early warning system. The Combat Information Center reported multiple raids by an estimated force of over 150 bandits. Maloney had rigorously trained his crew, ensuring that everyone was well-versed in their duties. The 5-inch magazines were stocked exclusively with proximity-fused shells. Gun crews practiced until they could sustain a rate of fire of up to 15 rounds per minute per gun. At 15:20 hours, the first wave launched an attack with 12 aircraft approaching from the north. Hadley's guns opened fire at a distance of 12,000 yards. The proximity fuses quickly began their lethal operations. The first plane was destroyed at 8,000 yards, followed by another at 6,000 yards, and then one more at 4,000 yards. A fourth kamikaze aircraft, already ablaze, crashed just 50 yards from the starboard beam, sending debris over the ship but causing no significant damage. However, this was merely the start of an intense battle that lasted for 95 minutes as Hadley fought off continuous waves of attackers. The gun barrels grew so hot they glowed red, and ammunition handlers fell from exhaustion before being replaced. Throughout it all, the proximity fuses continued to function effectively. Second-class Robert Eberly, who manned gun Mount 52 during this time, later recounted that the attackers came in from every conceivable angle, high, low, and everywhere else. The proximity fuses were a marvel to behold. Within seconds of being fired, they would detonate and scatter burning debris. Each round created an explosion that followed a precise pattern. Boom, 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 then 3 seconds later, another blast. This sequence continued relentlessly. By 16:15 hours, Hadley's fortunes changed dramatically when 3 damaged Kamikaze planes, still airborne despite earlier hits from the fuses, crashed into the ship in rapid succession. A 4th attacker dropped a bomb that exploded in the after-engine room. The damage was severe. 30 dead and 68 injured, engineering compartments flooded, fires raging everywhere. Yet miraculously, Hadley endured, and its gun crews kept up their defense. Even as firefighting teams battled blazes and flooding, forward guns remained active against incoming aircraft. By 16:55 hours, when the fighting ceased, Hadley had down 23 enemy planes, a record for a destroyer in one engagement. Commander Maloney's report highlighted that without proximity fuses, they would have been overwhelmed within 20 minutes. Damaged and aflame though the ship was, these devices enabled continued resistance where conventional ammunition alone would not suffice. The Okinawa campaign's toll was grim. 19-0 Japanese aircraft in kamikaze attacks, 368 U.S. ships damaged, 34 sunk, with 497 sailors killed and 24 wounded. Post-war studies suggested that without proximity fuses, casualties could have surpassed 15,000, and over 100 vessels might have been lost. The invention of proximity fuses was pivotal in turning what would have been a disastrous outcome into a hard-won victory. June 13, 1944, 400 hours, London. The unmistakable roar of the Pulse jet engine reverberated through the city, a piercing hum that was about to strike fear into millions. The initial Vone flying bomb of the primary offensive struck Grove Road in Bethnal Green, taking 6 lives, including Mrs. Carrie Harrison, who became the first casualty of Hitler's retaliation weapon in London. Unlike the Blitz from 1940 to 1941, London now boasted a defense that would have appeared extraordinary just 4 years prior. On June 12th, one day before the Vone offensive commenced, and 6 days after D-Day, Winston Churchill made a critical decision that would ultimately save thousands of lives. Overruling security officials who worried about technology falling into German hands, Churchill approved the use of proximity fuses for London's protection. General Sir Frederick Pyle, in command of anti-aircraft operations, positioned 500 heavy anti-aircraft guns, both British 3.7-inch and American 90mm weapons, in a defensive perimeter south of London. Each gun was integrated with SCR-500, an 84 microwave radar, and M9 electronic directors to create an automated defense system. However, without proximity fuses, the initial success rate remained at just 24% during the first week. Squadron leader Prudence Hill, stationed in the filter room at RAF Stanmore, observed this dramatic shift. In the first week, numerous V-1s approached London and most managed to penetrate its defenses despite constant gunfire from anti-aircraft units. Then, suddenly in the second week, everything changed. The guns began destroying V-1s with alarming efficiency. The plotting boards showed one Vone after another being eliminated 10 miles away from the city center. This remarkable turnaround was due to the arrival of proximity fuses directly from American production lines. By the third week, gunners were intercepting 46% of engaged V1s. In the fourth week, this figure rose to 79%. The improvement was so significant that German intelligence informed Hitler that Britain must have developed a new secret anti-robot weapon. Sergeant Kenneth Brown, from the U.S. 184th AAA Gun Battalion stationed near Biggin Hill, vividly described this transformation. With conventional shells, they had to predict exactly where and when the buzz bombs would be. 1 second out of sync or 1 degree off target, and we'd miss our mark entirely. With proximity fuses, all we needed was to come close. The shell would take care of the rest. It felt like transitioning from blindly throwing darts to aiming them with clear vision. On August 28, 1944, this defensive system reached its pinnacle of success. Early warning radar picked up a total of 104 V1s heading towards London. Our proximity-fused guns managed to destroy 96 of them, while the RAF fighters accounted for 4 more. Only 4 V1s made it through to London. The effectiveness of our defense rendered the threat posed by these flying bombs nearly non-existent. The numbers tell their own story. Over an 80-day period, around 93 Zero-Vone missiles were launched at London. Of those, roughly 2340 were eliminated by proximity-fused anti-aircraft fire. Without this defensive measure, the estimated additional casualties would have surpassed 20,000 fatalities and 50,000 injuries. Churchill later commented that the proximity fuse played a more significant role than any other single development in safeguarding London from severe devastation caused by Vone missiles. On December 15, 1944, Captain William Hartman of the 407 CTA Gun Battalion reviewed the intelligence report with grim satisfaction. His battalion had achieved an impressive success rate of nearly 97% over the past 24 hours, destroying 89 out of 92 V1s targeting Antwerp Harbor. This level of effectiveness would have been unimaginable just a few weeks prior. Antwerp served as the essential supply lifeline for Allied forces in Europe, with approximately 25,000 tons of supplies flowing through its 26 miles of docks daily. Food, ammunition, fuel, and medical supplies were critical for the Allied push into Germany, which would falter without access to Antwerp. Hitler understood this strategic importance. From October 24, 1944 to March 27, 1945, Germany launched over 49 Zero-Vone rockets at Antwerp, more than half the number aimed at London during that period. The initial defense of Antwerp was weak. Conventional time-fused shells only managed a success rate of about 40%. By November, around 30 V1s were hitting the port daily, jeopardizing the crucial supply route. On December 15th, a Lancaster bomber made an emergency landing at Antwerp Airport with a special cargo. 10,000 proximity fuses flown directly from Cincinnati under Churchill's direct order. Technical Sergeant Joseph Krizak, who operated an SCR 584 radar unit, noted the immediate impact of these new fuses. Prior to their deployment, despite precise tracking and accurate data input for the guns, shells consistently failed to hit their targets. They would explode in front of, behind, above, or below the V1s, but rarely on target. However, once proximity fuses were used, every shell burst meant a destroyed Vone rocket. It felt as though the Allies had been given guided missiles. German crews launching from sites in Holland became perplexed by this sudden change. Sites that previously achieved an 80% delivery rate to Antwerp now saw only 10% of their rockets reaching the city, with most being obliterated mid-flight. The Germans tried various tactics like increasing launch rates and altering times, but found no solution. The proximity fuses obliterated their targets with flawless mechanical precision. Private First Class Raymond Miller, who served as an ammunition handler in the 126th AAA Battalion, recounted the relentless pace of operations. Our constant firing depleted our storage facilities for proximity fuses. Supply trucks would arrive directly from the port carrying fresh shells and deliver them straight to the gun positions where they were immediately loaded into the artillery pieces. There was no time for inventory checks or paperwork. It was a continuous cycle of shooting without pause. Over just one 24-hour period, my battery alone fired off 1,400 rounds, each containing a marvel of engineering that was expended within a single day. By February 1945, the defensive measures had become so potent that German Von crew morale began to deteriorate. Colonel Max Wachtel, who led the Von offensive for the Luftwaffe, reported to Hitler that targeting Antwerp was akin to hurling missiles into an inferno. Despite this assessment, Hitler insisted on continuing the attacks, even though they served no strategic purpose other than wasting Germany's already scarce resources. The final tally of V-1s intercepted over Antwerp stood at 2183 out of 2394 engaged, a remarkable success rate of 91.2%. The port remained operational throughout these efforts, ensuring a steady flow of supplies to support the Allied advance into Germany. Proximity fuses had become an indispensable lifeline for this supply chain. On December 16, 1944, at dawn near Monschau, Colonel Oscar Alfred Axelson of the 406th Artillery Group received urgent reports from forward observers about a massive German offensive against his forces. The 38th Cavalry Squadron was vastly outnumbered by enemy troops, facing odds of nearly 10-1. This left Colonel Axelson with an agonizing choice to make. In his ammunition bunkers lay thousands of proximity-fused shells that had arrived only a few days earlier, with strict instructions never to be employed in ground combat under any circumstances due to the high risk of capture by enemy forces. Without them, however, the cavalry squadron would likely be overrun within hours. At 600 hours, Axelson issued an order that would forever alter ground warfare: load the proximity fuses for airbursts. The first volley landed among German infantry advancing through snow-covered fields near Huffen. Rather than exploding on impact and allowing soldiers in foxholes to survive, these shells detonated at their optimal altitude above the ground. This created a devastating effect, with fragments raining down in a lethal cone that reached into foxholes behind walls and under vehicles. There was nowhere to hide. Forward observer Lieutenant Richard Rolston reported via binoculars. First salvo airburst over German infantry company in open terrain, estimate 80% casualties. Survivors running back to Woodline. Request immediate repeat on Woodline. The second volley of airbursts exploded among the trees where Germans had sought cover. The resulting combination of shell fragments and splinters from shattered branches turned the forest into a killing zone extending over 100 yards deep. Veteran German soldiers, having experienced combat for 4 years, encountered something entirely new. Artillery that continued to kill even when they dove into foxholes or sought shelter in trees. Feldwebel Otto Hartmann of the 12th Volks Grenadier Division survived this barrage and was captured 2 days later. In his interrogation report, he stated, "The American artillery was unlike anything we had seen in Russia or Normandy. We dived into our holes, but the shells exploded above us. We fled to the forest, but they followed and detonated among the treetops. Platoon after platoon was annihilated within seconds." News of Axelson's success spread quickly. By December 19th, General Eisenhower had formally requested permission to use proximity fuses across the entire front line. On December 21st, authorization was granted. Within hours, every artillery unit in the Ardennes started firing shells equipped with proximity fuses. On December 28th, General George S. Patton, known for his directness, sent a message to the War Department stating that the shell with the peculiar fuse was incredibly effective. He recounted an incident where they intercepted a German battalion attempting to cross the Sauer River, hitting them precisely at battalion level with proximity-fused shells. The result: 702 confirmed enemy fatalities, and the surviving soldiers surrendered instantly due to their demoralization. Patton concluded by saying that this weapon was truly remarkable. Looking ahead prophetically, he noted, "When all armies have access to such weaponry, we will need to devise new methods of warfare." He expressed gratitude for having been the first to develop it. The proximity fuses, which were transforming battlefields worldwide, from the Pacific to Europe, originated in some surprising locations. Converted bakeries, former automobile workshops, and Christmas light factories scattered across America. The progression from Merle Tuvey's laboratory prototypes to mass production marked one of history's most impressive industrial achievements. By late 1942, the challenge seemed insurmountable, given that each proximity fuse needed 130 precise components never before produced on a large scale. The miniature vacuum tubes alone required tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch, and any defect could result in ineffective shells, potentially endangering American troops instead of targeting enemies. The mobilization effort began with Powell Crossley, Jr., owner of the Cincinnati Corporation that had made its fortune through radios and refrigerators, converting his entire facility for proximity fuse production. By January 1943, the assembly lines were running around the clock, 7 days a week. Betty Morrison, who worked on the assembly line at Crossley from 1943 to 1945, shared her experiences during an interview in 1995. She mentioned that they had no idea what they were manufacturing. Security was extremely tight. Workers were thoroughly searched upon entering and leaving the premises, with strict rules against bringing any bags or purses inside. They sat at their workbenches for 8 hours a day, soldering small components onto circuit boards. Their supervisors informed them that they were producing radio parts for aircraft. It wasn't until after the war ended that they discovered they had been assembling proximity fuses that would save countless lives. The production figures rose dramatically over time. In December 1942, daily output was around 500 units. By June 1943, this number increased to 8,000 per day, and by December 1943, it had surged to 40,000 units a day. By spring 1944, American factories were churning out more than 70,000 proximity fuses each day, surpassing Germany's monthly production of conventional fuses. Sylvania Electric Products in Ipswich Mills, Massachusetts emerged as the largest producer of these critical components. The company had rapidly expanded from a farm to employ 10,000 workers, 80% of whom were women, in just over a year and a half. They manufactured an astounding 100 million miniature vacuum tubes, achieving a daily production rate of 400,000 tubes, equivalent to 2/3 of America's total pre-war output. The health risks associated with the work became evident only many years later, when it was revealed that workers had been exposed to beryllium during soldering tasks without knowing about its hazardous effects. In a 2003 report, Pat Vlahos detailed how her mother had worked at Sylvania and the implications of this exposure for employees like her. In 1983, she received a diagnosis of malignant mesothelioma. She claimed to be unaware of the nature of the work being done. Everything was kept under strict secrecy. The beryllium exposure over 3 years ultimately led to her death 4 decades later. Production data illustrate America's industrial prowess during that era, involving 87 companies and 110 factories with a workforce peaking at 80,000 employees. From university labs to Christmas light manufacturers, from hearing aid firms to automobile parts makers, the nation revamped its manufacturing sector to produce advanced weaponry. The reduction in costs through mass production was nothing short of extraordinary. Initially costing $732 per unit in 1942, equivalent to approximately $11,514 in 2020. By 1945, each unit cost just $18, equal to roughly $256 in 2020. This resulted in a staggering 97.5% decrease in costs while maintaining an impressive operational reliability of 80%. It was a feat unique to American industrial capabilities. The security protocols for the proximity fuse program were as stringent as those of the Manhattan Project, and there was justification for such measures. If Germany or Japan had obtained and replicated this technology, it would have nullified the Allied forces' strategic edge instantly. The level of secrecy was unparalleled, maintaining confidentiality throughout the war years. Captain S.R. Shoemaker from the Naval Bureau of Ordnance devised the intentionally misleading term variable time fuse to obscure the device's true significance. Similarly, the Army referred to it as a posit fuse, using nonsensical letters that divulged no information. Factory workers were informed they were producing radio components or electronic parts for aircraft. Even the abbreviation VT was classified, and gun crews were instructed to say it meant variable time if questioned. At Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory, security measures bordered on paranoia, with every employee undergoing an FBI background check. The facility was so secretive that local Silver Spring residents observed groups of women entering at night and departing early in the morning, sparking curiosity about its purpose. Security guards referred to everyone as doctor, regardless of their actual role, making it difficult to identify key personnel. There were several close calls throughout this period. In July 1943, a defective proximity fuse shell fired from a destroyer landed on a Sicilian beach. Headquarters quickly sent out an urgent recovery team by air to secure the device before German forces could locate and analyze it. Although they managed to retrieve it successfully, the incident prompted new guidelines restricting land-based use of proximity fuses until after the Battle of the Bulge. In December 1944, a serious security breach occurred during the German offensive in the Ardennes. Nazi troops seized an American ammunition depot containing approximately 20,000 proximity fuses. If German scientists had recognized the significance of their capture, they might have developed countermeasures or replicated the technology. Remarkably, German engineers examined the captured devices and dismissed them as impossible to function correctly. Post-war interrogations with Dr. Hans Gerschen, a leading German fuse expert, revealed that the Germans concluded American fuses could not work due to their belief no vacuum tube could withstand the acceleration forces involved. This incident serves as testament to how far ahead American technology had advanced compared to its adversaries. Both Germany and Japan dedicated significant resources to developing proximity fuses during World War II, but failed to deploy them operationally, a factor that contributed significantly to their ultimate defeats. The German efforts were extensive yet disjointed. The Luftwaffe focused on acoustic fuses activated by aircraft engine sounds. Rheinmetall Borsig created electrostatic field fuses. The Wehrmacht evaluated photoelectric fuses. Meanwhile, the Kriegsmarine explored magnetic influence fuses. From 1940 to 1945, German research institutions developed between 30 and 50 distinct proximity fuse designs. Dr. Werner Rambowski, a leading expert in proximity fuses during this period, provided an explanation after the war. He stated that they fully grasped the theoretical aspects but lacked three crucial components: miniature vacuum tubes capable of withstanding high acceleration, large-scale production capabilities for intricate electronics, and coordinated research efforts across different departments. In contrast to America, which centralized all proximity fuse research under Merle IV at Section T, Germany had fragmented programs within the Luftwaffe, Wehrmacht, Kriegsmarine, and SS research facilities that did not collaborate effectively. Japan faced an even more challenging situation. Lieutenant Commander Yuzuru Fuku of the Imperial Japanese Navy Technical Research Institute later testified about their realization by 1943 that American anti-aircraft fire had become incredibly accurate. They suspected the use of proximity fuses, but could not figure out how they worked. By 1945, Japan managed to develop a photoelectric fuse and tested it once in a dropped bomb, yet they lacked the industrial capacity for mass production. Instead of attempting to match American technological advancements, Japan's response was tactical: kamikaze attacks that accepted high casualties to ensure hitting their targets. This strategy signified an acknowledgement of technological inferiority and a shift towards human sacrifice as a means to compensate for inadequate technology. Beyond the numerical data and battle summaries lie personal narratives that highlight the human aspect of proximity fuses. Merle IV was driven by personal struggles to achieve his goals. When he was 17 years old, his father passed away during the 1918 influenza pandemic, leaving the family in dire poverty. His mother supported them by doing laundry to finance his education. The laboratory walls with their motto, "Save time, not money," underscored Merle's belief that delays could be fatal in war. Colleagues would often find him alone in his office at 3 a.m., reviewing casualty reports from the Pacific and calculating how many lives faster production might have saved. James Van Allen's transition from physicist to naval officer was equally significant. After developing shock-proof vacuum tubes, he insisted on combat duty to see his inventions in action. On board USS Washington during the Philippine Sea Battle, he witnessed his tubes protecting fellow sailors. He later wrote that this moment was the most fulfilling of his scientific career, seeing theoretical physics save real lives. Betty Thompson, an assembly worker at Crossley Corporation, learned only in 1985 what she had been building during the war. For 40 years, she thought she was making radio parts, but then watched a film about proximity fuses and realized her contribution to saving American soldiers from kamikaze attacks. She began to cry as she understood that all those tiny components she soldered were part of miracles. Lieutenant Robert Cochran, who fired the first proximity fuse combat shots from USS Helena, carried the weight of this moment throughout his life. In a 1975 interview, he reflected, "I knew we were firing something special. The security briefing made that clear. But when I saw that Japanese plane just come apart in midair without being hit directly, I realized we had something that would change everything." It felt as though I had witnessed the creation of gunpowder itself. Technical Sergeant Marie Collins, one of the few women allowed in the applied physics lab, focused on quality control testing. We would test the fuses by firing them from air guns to ensure proper arming. One day, a fuse exploded prematurely, nearly taking the lives of 3 technicians. This incident made us realize that we were not merely assembling electronics. We were crafting weapons that had to be flawless or American lives could be at risk. The German viewpoint was equally insightful. Hauptmann Klaus Richter, who observed the initial ground combat deployment of proximity fuses in Monschau, survived as a prisoner and later taught at the reformed German General Staff College in 1965. There, he informed his students that the Americans had developed a weapon that rendered traditional defensive strategies obsolete almost instantly. Within minutes, centuries of military doctrine became irrelevant. That is how significant technological superiority can be. The impact of proximity fuses can be quantified through precise statistics that highlight their crucial role in Allied victory. Naval warfare data provides a clear illustration. Before the advent of proximity fuses in 1942, it took between 500 and 2,000 rounds to destroy an aircraft, depending on various conditions. With proximity fuses introduced from 1943 through 1945, only 155 rounds were needed per aircraft destroyed. This represents a 600% to 1,200% improvement in efficiency. During the entire Pacific War, proximity fuses were responsible for destroying an estimated 4,000 Japanese aircraft. Post-war analysis indicated that without these advanced fuses, only around 650 of those planes would have been destroyed using conventional ammunition. The additional destruction of 3,350 aircraft by proximity fuses likely saved the lives of approximately 8,000 American sailors and prevented the sinking of an estimated 40 to 50 more ships. In London's Vosne defensive campaign, proximity fuses were credited with destroying 2,340 flying bombs. Without their presence, based on Week 1 success rates, only 560 would have been destroyed. The extra 1780 V1s would likely have resulted in an estimated 9,000 civilian deaths and 25,000 injuries. Antwerp's defense was particularly noteworthy. Of the 2,394 V1s targeted, 2,183 were destroyed, achieving a success rate of 91.2%. Without proximity fuses, even with conventional shells hitting just 40% of their targets, an additional 1,400 V1s would have struck the port area, potentially closing Antwerp and disrupting Allied operations in northwest Europe. During the Battle of the Bulge, ground combat statistics show that 200,000 proximity-fused shells were fired over 2 weeks. The estimated German casualties from these fuses range between 10,000 to 15,000. Traditional artillery might have caused around 2,000 casualties with the same ammunition expenditure. The psychological impact was profound. Entire units surrendered rather than face air burst bombardment, a factor that significantly contributed to the failure of the German offensive. Production statistics highlight American industrial superiority. 22,073,481 proximity fuses were manufactured by 87 companies across 110 factories. At peak production, this involved 80,000 workers and required an investment of $1 billion, equivalent to approximately $15 billion today. The cost per kill analysis demonstrates remarkable efficiency. The average cost per proximity-fused shell in 1945 was $18. Conventional rounds typically required about $500, $2 each, for a kill, whereas proximity-fused shells needed only $2,790, $18 each. While proximity fuses were more expensive per kill, they achieved the kill with 69% fewer rounds, reducing gun barrel wear, crew fatigue, and logistical burdens while significantly increasing defensive success rates. The importance of proximity fuses was recognized at the highest levels of Allied leadership. Testimonials place them among the most decisive technologies of the war. Vannevar Bush, director of the Office of Scientific Research and Development, provided a comprehensive assessment. Proximity-fused shells increased the effectiveness of 5-inch anti-aircraft artillery by 7 times in the Pacific, played an essential role in radar-controlled anti-aircraft batteries that neutralized German Vosne attacks on London, and fundamentally changed land warfare tactics, starting with the Battle of the Bulge. No other development except radar and the atomic bomb had a comparable impact on the war's outcome. General Dwight D. Eisenhower's evaluation carried significant weight due to his strategic perspective. Had the Germans managed to develop and deploy these advanced weapons 6 months sooner, our European invasion would have faced severe challenges, possibly rendering it unfeasible. The proximity fuses provided us with a critical edge during this pivotal period. In 1945, Secretary of the Navy James Forrestal addressed Congress, stating that proximity fuses had paved the way to Japan. Without the safeguard these innovative devices offered to fleet vessels, our westward advancement would have been slower and more costly in terms of human lives and naval assets. Admiral Willis A. Lee, who commanded battleships in the Pacific, was straightforward about their importance. Proximity fuses made kamikaze attacks survivable. Without them, we would have lost half our fleet at Okinawa. General George Patton's evaluation blended tactical insight with strategic foresight, asserting that proximity fuses not only secured the Battle of the Bulge, but also revealed the future direction of warfare, weapons capable of autonomous decision-making. Thank God we got it first. Winston Churchill, in his memoirs, offered a statesman's viewpoint. Proximity fuses saved London from flying bombs. This defensive weapon proved more valuable than any offensive armament, including the atomic bomb. The American knack for mass-producing intricate devices provided us with crucial protection when it was most needed. Even German leaders admitted to their post-war interrogators the profound impact of proximity fuses. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt stated, "American proximity fuses rendered our traditional defensive positions indefensible. We could no longer count on trenches and fortifications. It was a revolutionary change in artillery that we couldn't match or counter." While these devices saved countless Allied lives, their production concealed hidden costs that became evident only decades later. The beryllium used in manufacturing proved to be toxic. Employees at Sylvania, Crossley, and other plants worked with beryllium-copper alloys every day without knowing the metal's harmful effects. Berylliosis, which can develop anywhere from 20 to 60 years later, affected hundreds or possibly thousands of workers decades after World War II ended. Margaret Chen testified before Congress in 2000 and one about her mother's experiences at Sylvania's Ipswich Mills facility. Her mother soldered proximity-fused components for 3 years and was proud of contributing to the war effort. In 1978, she developed beryllium disease and died in 1983 from pulmonary complications caused by it. Essentially a casualty of World War II delayed by 4 decades. The Department of Energy's former worker medical screening program, launched in the 1990s, identified hundreds of World War II electronics workers suffering from beryllium-related illnesses. Many had already passed away without knowing their wartime work was fatal. Dr. Robert Mayer, who studied beryllium disease among war workers, noted that these women, predominantly female employees, were essential to the war effort. They handled hazardous materials with no protective measures because the dangers were unknown at the time. Their contributions saved countless lives, but came at a severe personal cost many decades later. Proximity-fused shells not only won battles, but also revolutionized military doctrine, compelling a complete rethinking of tactics that had been in place for centuries. Artillery methods changed dramatically overnight. For 500 years, since the advent of gunpowder, artillery was mainly used for direct fire or ground explosions. Soldiers protected themselves by digging trenches. However, proximity-fused shells turned those protective measures into death traps because they exploded at predetermined heights and sent shrapnel downward in angles that reached even deep foxholes and bunkers without overhead cover. Major General James Gavin, who led the 82nd Airborne Division, reflected on his post-war analysis. The advent of proximity fuses rendered traditional infantry tactics outdated, necessitating a complete overhaul of training for our troops. Dispersion emerged as an imperative strategy, while overhead cover became mandatory. Movement supplanted entrenchment as the critical factor for survival. Naval tactics underwent equally profound changes. Prior to proximity fuses, naval task forces relied heavily on large fighter escorts to protect against aerial attacks. However, once these new fuses were introduced, surface ships could operate independently, their anti-aircraft batteries providing robust protection against air threats. This flexibility significantly accelerated the island hopping campaign in the Pacific. Admiral Raymond Spruance observed that proximity fuses granted us a tactical advantage we had never previously enjoyed. Single destroyers could now engage in independent operations, secure in the knowledge that they were capable of defending themselves from aerial assaults. This approach effectively expanded our operational capabilities by enabling dispersed maneuvers. Air defense doctrine shifted from relying on statistical barrages to focusing on precise engagements. Before proximity fuses, the strategy involved saturating the sky with shells in hopes of scoring lucky hits. Post-proximity fuse technology emphasized controlled and targeted fire, ensuring a high probability of kills. Gun crews transitioned from volume firing to precision marksmanship. The development of proximity fuses stands as an early example of successful collaborative technological innovation between Britain and America. Initially conceived by the British with initial research contributions, this model defined Allied cooperation throughout World War II and into the Cold War era. The United States supplied the industrial capacity and resources necessary for success. This collaboration proved to be unparalleled. Neither country alone could have developed and deployed proximity fuses in time to alter the course of the war. Sir Henry Tizard noted that this exchange was mutually beneficial, stating, "We shared our concepts with the Americans, who reciprocated by providing us with millions of weapons. It was undoubtedly Britain's most advantageous trade deal." The achievements fostered a cooperative spirit that persisted beyond World War II. The Proximity Fuse project set a precedent for technology sharing, intelligence collaboration, and joint weapon development within NATO during the Cold War era. The impact of these fuses extended well into the post-war period, influencing both military advancements and civilian technological progress over several decades. The miniaturization techniques derived from proximity fuses significantly contributed to the advancement of transistors and integrated circuits. James Van Allen utilized shock-hardening methods learned through proximity fuse development for instruments aboard Explorer I, America's inaugural satellite, leading to the discovery of the Van Allen radiation belts. The organizational framework that paired university laboratories with industry under government oversight became a model for Cold War research initiatives. The Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory, established specifically for proximity fuse development, remains one of the premier defense research institutions in the United States, having made significant contributions ranging from submarine-launched ballistic missiles to space exploration endeavors. Quality control measures implemented for proximity fuses, demanding 80% reliability under extreme conditions, set new benchmarks for aerospace and defense industries. Statistical process control methods pioneered by Western Electric during proximity fuse production became widely adopted across American industry. Today's advanced guided weapons, such as radar-guided missiles, laser-guided bombs, and GPS-directed munitions, all trace their origins back to the first smart weapon, the proximity fuse. The concept of autonomous weaponry capable of making decisions without direct human intervention originated with Merle II's vacuum tubes. In May 1945, American technical intelligence teams exploring defeated Germany uncovered extensive research on proximity fuses in underground facilities and abandoned laboratories, revealing a level of advancement far beyond expectations, but still years away from practical application. Colonel Howard Dix, who headed Technical Intelligence Team 314, provided a report from the Luftwaffe research facility in Fulkenroder. The Germans possessed proximity-fused programs at all their major research institutions. They comprehended the underlying principles completely and had designs that could have potentially functioned. However, they lacked the industrial capability to convert laboratory prototypes into mass production. At Peenemünde, where WWII rockets were developed, researchers tested acoustic proximity fuses. At Richlin, the Luftwaffe test center, photoelectric fuses underwent evaluation. The Kriegsmarine facility at Kiel had created magnetic influence fuses for naval shells. Dr. Albert Speer, Hitler's armaments minister, revealed during interrogation that they learned about proximity fuses from captured American shells in December 1944. Initially, their scientists dismissed them as impossible due to the harsh conditions and presumed fragility of electronics. When they finally accepted the reality, it was too late. The Germans were hampered by a lack of vacuum tube technology, production facilities, and most importantly, time. This failure underscored the true achievement of proximity fuses, not just technical innovation, but the successful integration of science with industry on an unprecedented scale in wartime America during the 1940s. Post-war interrogations further revealed that Japanese attempts to comprehend these fuses were even more futile, resulting in total confusion about American anti-aircraft effectiveness. Admiral Somu Toyoda, who served as the commander-in-chief of the combined fleet, gave testimony. By 1944, American anti-aircraft fire had become so precise that it seemed almost supernatural. Our pilots reported shells that appeared to follow their aircraft closely and exploded at precisely the right moment. Captain Mitsuo Fuchida, the leader of the Pearl Harbor attack, narrowly escaped several encounters with proximity-fused anti-aircraft fire. He recalled witnessing experienced pilots disintegrate midair during attacks on American carriers in 1944. Their aircraft were shredded by shells that detonated without making contact. We had no explanation for this phenomenon. Some pilots speculated that the Americans had created a death ray. In response to technological inferiority, Japan adopted kamikaze tactics, turning pilots into human-guided missiles and accepting certain death in hopes of achieving any damage at all. While both Germany and Japan failed to develop proximity fuses independently, the Soviet Union succeeded through espionage. Julius Rosenberg, an employee at Emerson Radio and Phonograph Corporation, stole a complete proximity fuse in 1944 and handed it over to Soviet intelligence. The theft went unnoticed until Rosenberg's arrest in 1950. By then, Soviet forces had already deployed their own proximity-fused anti-aircraft shells based entirely on American designs. During the Korean War, Communist forces employed these advanced anti-aircraft shells against American aircraft, turning American technology against its creators. David Greenglass, Julius Rosenberg's brother-in-law and a witness in his trial, stated that Julius was proud of stealing the proximity fuses and believed it to be more significant than atomic bomb information because it could be used immediately. He may have been correct. Military historians consistently place proximity fuses among World War II's three most decisive technologies, alongside radar and atomic weapons. Unlike the atomic bomb, which was deployed only twice during World War II, proximity fuses were extensively utilized from January 1943 until August 1945, impacting numerous battles. Dr. Arnold Kramer, a military historian at Texas A&M University, asserts that proximity fuses caused more casualties among enemy troops, saved more Allied lives, and had a greater influence on the course of the war than any other secret weapon during World War II. They were the most potent secret weapon because they were employed ubiquitously with devastating results. The data supports this conclusion. An estimated 25,000 enemy aircraft were destroyed or damaged by proximity fuses, along with over 5,000 Von flying bombs. Additionally, tens of thousands of enemy soldiers perished due to proximity-fused artillery. The number of Allied lives saved was in the hundreds of thousands, but beyond these figures lies a broader transformation. Proximity fuses revolutionized warfare by ushering in an era of smart weaponry. They demonstrated that technological superiority could yield decisive military advantages, and showed that democratic nations could out-innovate totalitarian regimes when they harnessed civilian science and industry. Each proximity fuse was the result of human ingenuity, sacrifice, and perseverance. Merle Tuve struggled with the intensity of war for years afterward. In 1946, colleagues found him weeping alone in his laboratory at Johns Hopkins University. "If only we had been faster by just a few weeks," he lamented. "How many lives could have been saved?" For the rest of his career, Tuve focused on astronomical research to distance himself from weapon development. James Van Allen capitalized on his wartime experience to pioneer space exploration. The shock-hardening techniques he developed for proximity fuses protected instruments aboard early satellites. When asked about his work during World War II, he would simply say, "I helped save lives," adding that everything else he accomplished afterward seemed less significant in comparison. Betty Morrison at Crossley and Marie Collins at Johns Hopkins were among thousands of women whose identities have faded into obscurity, yet they carried out their clandestine work with quiet dedication. Many remained unaware of the impact of their labor for decades, if ever. Their dexterous hands and meticulous attention to detail safeguarded countless lives on distant battlefields. Gunners like Anthony Pucci aboard USS Helena recognized the significance of these proximity fuses right away. He likened them to having divine support in combat. Every time a green-banded shell was loaded into a gun, there was assurance that an American pilot or sailor would survive due to it. The program for developing proximity fuses cost around $1 billion in 1940s currency, equivalent to approximately $15 billion today. It involved the efforts of 87 companies, 110 factories, and employed about 80,000 workers. These resources could have alternatively been used to manufacture thousands of tanks or hundreds of ships. However, was this expenditure justified? The answer can be found in battles that were prevented, vessels that were saved from sinking, urban centers spared from destruction, and most crucially, lives preserved. Every Japanese aircraft eliminated before reaching its intended target meant safety for American sailors. Every Von missile neutralized prior to striking London ensured the survival of British citizens. Each German soldier taken out by airburst artillery prevented further casualties among Allied troops. Admiral Chester Nimitz summarized it best. Proximity fuses were equivalent to deploying 10 infantry divisions, 100 aircraft squadrons, or an entire naval fleet. This technology exemplified force multiplication and embodied the American approach to warfare through innovation. While history tends to highlight renowned military leaders, pivotal battles, and dramatic turning points, the contributions of scientists and laborers who developed these critical tools often go unnoticed. Merle Tuve passed away in 1982, yet his significant role in securing victory remains largely unrecognized by most Americans. James Van Allen gained fame through his space research, but was less known for his contributions during the war over Shaddot. Other notable figures like Lloyd Berkner, Richard Roberts, and Henry Porter are mostly remembered only within technical histories. The women who assembled proximity fuses continue to be nearly forgotten. There are no memorials or awards acknowledging their efforts. However, their meticulous work with hazardous materials they barely understood played a crucial role in saving countless lives. The success of the proximity fuses was due to collective effort. British scientists sharing secrets, American researchers tackling complex challenges, factory workers assembling innovative devices, and soldiers and sailors deploying these advanced weapons. It wasn't about individual heroes, but rather the contributions of hundreds of thousands working towards a common goal. 2 weeks after the first devastating use at Monschau, as 1944 turned into 1945, Hauptmann Klaus Richter made his final diary entry. The Battle of the Bulge was failing, and German forces were retreating. American proximity-fused artillery continued its relentless barrage. Each air burst lit up the snow-covered battlefield with deadly precision. We are facing not just American soldiers, but also the fruits of American scientific innovation. Their shells think, they calculate, and they decide when to kill. God help Germany, because we have awakened a giant whose weapons are guided by intelligent technology. Richter had no way of knowing how accurate he was. The proximity fuse signified far more than just advanced technology. It embodied the strength of free societies leveraging civilian expertise for military objectives. In contrast, German scientists operated in isolation and Japanese researchers worked without knowledge of global advancements. Meanwhile, American scientists, British physicists, and Canadian engineers openly collaborated, exchanging findings and tackling challenges collectively. This weapon was a product of democracy, crafted by citizens who were not only innovative, but also protected by soldiers dedicated to the cause of freedom. Its creation demanded not just technical proficiency, but also trust. Between allies sharing secrets, between governments and academic institutions, and between military and civilian sectors. Such levels of trust, unattainable in totalitarian systems, offered a critical edge. From its inception as an October 1939 concept to mass production by 1943, the proximity fuse evolved from British desperation through American ingenuity to Allied triumph. Along this journey, it saved countless lives, shortened the war's duration significantly, and heralded the era of intelligent weaponry that persists today. The proximity fuse demonstrated that victory could also be achieved through superior technology and industrial might. It showcased that thinking weapons could augment human strength beyond what was previously conceivable. Most importantly, it illustrated that free nations, by pooling their intellectual and industrial resources, could accomplish feats that totalitarian regimes could only dream of. In the vacuum tubes designed to withstand extreme forces by James Van Allen, and in the circuits engineered by Lloyd Berkner to detect incoming threats, as well as in the precise soldering done by countless anonymous women, lay the difference between victory and defeat, freedom and tyranny. This margin defined the world we inherited and safeguarded from unimaginable devastation. The proximity fuse was indeed the most effective secret weapon of the war, not due to its sheer power, but because it was used continuously across every front, decisively tipping the balance in favor of the Allies. This device represented a future where embedded intelligence in weaponry would enhance human capabilities beyond previous imagination. When German soldiers at Elsenborn Ridge sought shelter in bunkers that were no longer secure from superior firepower, they encountered more than just advanced technology. They faced the dawn of an era driven by intelligent weapons. This future, which originated during the desperate days of 1940 and was tested through the crucible of World War, began with a simple idea. Imagine an artillery shell capable of thought, Its conception safeguarded the entire free world.